Hello, today we're going to start talking about chapter 3. Chapter 3 is about theory. Pardon the background noise. My children are home today. And I want to share the screen and let's get started. When we talk about theory, we're really talking about it from the perspective of if we're going to take an intelligent approach to crime. In other words, what do we do with people when they're convicted of crimes? It's going to make it less likely that they commit crimes or that, and to dissuade other members of society from committing crimes. There's a whole lot of stuff to unpack with that discussion. But really, it starts with what is a crime, right? And a crime is very simply is something that violates a written statute. You know, we cannot have a criminal violation without having a written criminal law that defines what conduct is required in order to be guilty of that. We can't just, say, oh, that should be illegal, so you're going to jail. No, we have to know what specific statute that this person has violated. And so somebody can and has a legal right to in America engage in deviant behavior, behavior that is outside of the norm, behavior that is maybe even disapproved of or frowned upon by polite society, but yet it is not in and of itself illegal. So, you know, there's a lot of deviant behavior that is criminalized, that is um, illegal, but not all of it is. That being said, a theory is just an educated guess as to that one thing is related to another, or that causes another. And there's lots of different theories out there for what causes people to commit crime, what causes crime to get out of control, what can be done to maybe control crime. And it all, every theory that's out there probably has some foundation and some merit. And the truth be told is there isn't necessarily a one size fits all approach to this where man, if we just do this one thing, it's just going to solve all of our problems, right? We're complex. We're complex creatures. Our society is complex, and there is a multitude of factors that contribute to why people do what they do. So, that being said, it's not a waste of time to talk about it because there is, you know, um, there is something to it. So, that being said, we've kind of split criminal theories into a bunch of different categories. The one that we're probably going to emphasize the most throughout this class is going to be classical criminology. And that's because it, I think, appeals most to the sense, the human instinct for justice, right? That we want people to be accountable for their behavior. A lot of the other theories kind of point to ways in which maybe sometimes our behavior is maybe not quite fully within our control, or excuses that kind of justify why some people choose to act out in criminal ways and other people don't. That being said, it doesn't mean that these other theories don't have merit. It just means that what do you take away from that? And so when crime and disorder gets out of control, the default setting always moves back to classical criminology. I mean, it's just kind of the way that it is. So that being said, today we're going to focus primarily on the classical theory, and then in another lesson we'll do that. I'm going to try to make these lessons not drag out to eternity, because I know it's hard to set through extra long videos. So I'm going to try to keep it, thereabouts 20 to 30 minutes tops on these lesson videos, and then split it up into several videos if need be. So that being said, um, believe it or not, it's really a relatively recent phenomenon that we have had a lot of intelligent discourse about the problem of crime. The way that it was handled, um, up until just a few hundred years ago, really had a lot to do with, you know, just kind of assuming that anybody that was engaged in criminal behavior, or was identified as a criminal, was just a terrible, awful person, with no redeeming qualities, and they, pretty much, killed them a large portion of the time, or at the very least perpetrated like kind of brutal violence towards them. I mean, some of the things that were done, punishments that were meted out in the olden days, would really shock the conscience of modern Americans, because it was not uncommon for people to be, drawn and quartered, which meant that they were like pulled apart. They tied horses, tied ropes to, they got horses together and tied ropes to each of your limbs, and the horses went in different directions until they literally pulled you apart. They, had these kind of medieval torture machines that would implement serious pain upon people, because it was thought that they were like possessed by demons, and this was, you know, the only way to, punish them. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Crucifixion was a common uh, method of punishment. You know, um, they got really inventive about it, but it was really based upon the principle that, evil people do evil things, and they deserve to be tortured and killed. And so, without really thinking about it, they were kind of defaulted to hold the subject accountable for their behavior. And they didn't make excuses for it. So, the classical theory, the foundation of classical criminology, when it started to be discussed by intellectuals, a couple hundred years ago, was that we as human beings have free will. We're able to do the things that we want to do. We, have what we call a hedonistic calculus, and that means that we seek out things that are desirable or pleasurable, and we try to avoid things that are painful. And so, basically, when somebody commits a crime, the punishment should be intended to inflict some form or fashion of pain, whether that is physical pain or psychological pain or some combination of the two. But it needs to implement a undesired outcome towards the perpetrator, to a degree that the perpetrator will then choose to refrain from engaging in that behavior in the future. And also, others who maybe see what's happened will also refrain from it. Cesar Beccaria is kind of the father of this theory. Like I said, really, to tell you the truth, these old medieval punishments were really kind of going for this goal of punishment, of, deterrence and incapacitation, but they didn't talk about it in those terms. So basically, the what he was trying to do was to say that, look, people are capable of changing their behavior because they act upon free will. And if we make it hurt bad enough, to commit crime, then they will choose not to commit crime, you know. And so if I perceive, right, if I'm tempted to shoplift from Walmart, right? Let's say that I'm tempted for whatever reason, either maybe I'm down and out on my luck or whatever, and I just see something I really want, and I think, oh, I could just grab it right now and run out of here, right? The knowledge that, hey, what's the product of that? What's going to happen if I do that is that I'm going to get charged with a crime. I'm going to get put in jail. I'm going to, I have to lose my job and all this other kind of stuff. Then maybe I choose not to do it. So the the genius of this theory is that we are holding individuals accountable for their conduct, and we aren't writing them off as if there is no hope for them, right? We're saying we need to punish them. We need swift, certain, and severe punishment so that they will change their ways. So it marked the first time we saw a shift away from basically um, punishing people for the sake of hurting them to punishing people in the hopes that they will turn from their awful behavior. So that's what I was talking about, the hedonistic calculus. So that being said, I'm trying to find, because I usually like to talk about first the goals of punishment, but I'm not seeing that in this PowerPoint. So I'm just going to talk about it now. And if it comes up later, then it is what it is. So if when we talk about somebody's been convicted of a crime and now we're going to punish them, what goals are we seeking to that end? Right? And so there's several possibilities for what we can seek out as goals of punishment. And so one of them, the first one, is going to be retribution. Another one is going to be deterrence. Another one is going to be incapacitation. Another goal could be rehabilitation. And finally, we have restoration. So when we're trying to figure out what should we do with a person, right? We have these goals in mind. It can be a combination of them. It doesn't have to be exclusive. We can accomplish, let's say, we can accomplish retribution and incapacitation at the same time. We can accomplish deterrence and rehabilitation at the same time, and that last one is has to do with basically making amends to the people that you've wronged. But if we're talking about what is retribution, retribution is this person has committed an evil act and they deserve to be punished, and it needs to hurt for the purposes of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We're going to lash out at this individual because they have done something terrible, right? Retribution is getting back at somebody, basically. You know, incapacitation is at its core removing somebody's ability to commit crime. And this can be done in several ways, right? It could be the modern incarnation of this typically is lock them up and throw away the key, right? We keep them in prison so that they aren't a danger to society at large. The medieval incarnation of this was kill them because dead men can't commit crimes. You know, I mean, in both ways, you accomplish removing their ability to harm people. Of course, in the latter, it's permanently, whereas in the former, it's for a specific term or a specific length of time. Again, deterrence is trying to cause people to change their mind, either before they act, which would be general deterrence, or after they act, which would be specific to the offender. We want the punishment to be, that's that classical criminology approach. We want a punishment that is swift, certain, and severe so that the person will think twice and society at large will know what to expect if they engage in similar conduct. And again, remember, you can accomplish multiple things at the same time. So back when they used to, like, burn people at the stake, or, and have crucifixions and different things like that. They used to do that as a public display. People would come out and watch, and it accomplished retribution because you were inflicting pain on the individual. It accomplished incapacitation because it removed their ability to commit future crime. And then also, hopefully, it also caused deterrence, general deterrence in the crowd of people that saw this is what happens basically when you do this. So that being said, I just wanted to get to that, and it's probably in the PowerPoints somewhere, but then again, I don't really know where. So there it is. Why is this? Okay. So back to where we were. Classical criminology is really about taking some of the ideas that were the foundation of the older, more brutal punishments and kind of harnessing that in a way that was more humane, and but still accomplishing some of the goals that the former was meant to accomplish. So because people tend to be rational and to self-centered to a degree, and everything else, if you can cause them to think that the punishment outweighs the benefit of the crime, you can cause people to choose to refrain from committing that crime, right? And that can be a legitimate aim and a legitimate goal of punishment. And again, it kind of becomes the default setting. Whenever things get out of control, people want justice, they want accountability, they want people to be held accountable for their actions. And so it has ebbed and flowed and evolved over the years with different variations or different offshoots. But the root goal of classical criminology is that we want the punishment, the threat of punishment to outweigh the benefits of the crime. It is possible for some things, and I think probably not possible for others, where we've seen, like back in the 20s when they had prohibition, there was a constitutional amendment that during the 20s that alcohol was illegal, and they never really did have a firm handle on enforcing that because it was so rampant that people were kind of going outside of the law to get it, and it was such a financial benefit to be supplying it that people really flouted the law in that regard until it got to a point where they repealed that amendment. So that being said, When you have crime that is relatively minor in nature, there's only so much of a severe punishment that people will tolerate for minor crimes, and then you kind of lose control and lose credibility. So, but for serious crimes in particular, it is kind of a valid goal. So that's going to be it for this lesson. I'll talk about some other theories in another video. Thank you.